I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. We're on. Changes to the agenda.
Sorry, my mouth was full.
I timed it right.
Yes, you did. 3 changes to the agenda. Addition of recognition for Councilmember Timmons with the presentations, proclamations, and acknowledgement. We're moving traffic operations change request policy from consent to general business item 8B. And you've got a corrected memorandum and resolution on the resignation date for Councilmember Timmons. It was listed as July 31st. It should have been July 30th. So those are the 3 changes.
Motion to approve the amended agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we have one presentation proclamation or an acknowledgement. Recognition of service for Councilmember Timmons.
Stop it. Don't even y'all start with me. Stop
Trish was
it.
appointed to the council in March 2015. She was elected as a council member in 2017. Trish's current appointments include Commissioner EDA, Vice Chair of I-35 Solutions Alliance, MVTA alternate, Chamber of Commerce rep alternate, and 50 by 30 workforce readiness. And I will say, an I-35, they didn't have that on here, but I knew it. Well, you're Vice Chair of I-35, so. Trish has been one of the most active council people that we've had. She serves on more committees outside the city than any other council person. It's been a joy to have her serving on some of those committees and representing our city. She's done a really good job. We're going to miss her. Public comment. Anyone here for public comment this evening for any item that is not on the agenda? Going once, twice, 3 times, public comment is closed. Consent agenda. Any items on the consent agenda anybody wants to pull or have questions on? Joe?
I'd like to pull item E and move it to general business.
Okay. Item E will become item C.
Motion to approve the amended consent agenda.
Did you have any?
Comment
Oh, we got a
slash
comment.
question,
Sorry.
about the claims and stuff. You do a lot of damn driving. It was amazing. to
Yes, he
see
does.
That quarterly statement of $940 for mileage.
I do a lot of driving. I'm in St. Paul 3 times last week. I'll be in St. Paul 3 to 4 times next week. And that's, if we get the sewer surcharge taken off, it'll be more than worth it.
But, and I don't mean it as anything other than we should really look at how it's budgeted, and I don't remember what we even budgeted for, but as we go through that process, I mean, as more of us are involved in a lot of outside meetings, which ones of those meetings do we want everybody to be going to? I mean, it'll start to add up, and I guess that was my comment, it's like, holy cow. I mean, and I know you go to a lot of meetings, so I'm not even saying it's not because of that, so there's just a lot.
And there's a few of those that we're parking at a couple of the meetings too. It all adds on to one line item, so. Okay, a motion.
Motion to approve the amended consent agenda.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right. Motion carries. General business A.
nothing's gonna get approved moving forward because we're gonna be
You're gonna have
looking,
2 and 2.
we're gonna be waiting for you two to do the motion in the second, and we're gonna be like,
I figured since it's my last hurrah, I was just gonna go for it.
Yeah.
Okay, it's adopt resolution 18-42, accepting council member resignation and declaring a vacancy on the city council.
Can I move it?
Discussion?
So moved.
So this is just a.
It's just
we're
accepting
just
my
accepting
formal
resignation.
resignation, correct. It's not like
Declaring
you,
a vacancy.
right.
Yeah. You moved?
I did move.
Second.
Moved and seconded, all in favor?
Aye.
Motion carries.
Makes reading the minutes easier.
do we want to do, because one of the actions requested was to provide direction?
Well, now we can, since we got the motion out of the way,
I didn't know. if we-
now we can do the discussion on direction, what we want to do next. Do we want to try and get it in where we appoint somebody for one meeting or possibly two, or do we just leave it vacant and move it to the general election?
I think we just leave it vacant and put it towards the general election.
I agree.
I agree.
Which is why I resigned when I did. So that you could.
There's not enough time really to appoint anybody, and
No, and if I had waited, you wouldn't have been able to get it on.
And you gave us the option.
Right.
So I think the only thing that I would add is a hundred.
99.9.
I don't 100% agree. But, I mean, it makes logical sense. I think we reevaluate this at our next meeting to see who's filed for candidacy for the 2 seats that are up for reelection and then this new open seat. Because I guess I would argue if we only have one individual that's running for Trish's now vacant seat, do we want to see if we can get that person in sooner and appoint them and have them be a part of the budget discussions, or wait? And so I think, I just
I see what
suggest
you're saying.
we look at it, if we only have one person, again, I guess a write-in could beat that person potentially, but assuming that that's not gonna be the case, again, not 100%.
well,
but-
we have had a write-in winner.
Against an
I
open
wanted to
seat,
write in.
right, but that was again, and, yeah.
So,
Don't shred me.
No.
But when-
the only argument against that, even if we only have one, depending on I think at this point, by appointing that person, it would preclude anybody from doing a write-in campaign. So,
Well, but by appointing a person, in theory, the election then doesn't assume that that person's gonna win, so they could be here for 2 months.
Right.
And then not be
well, they'd
voted
be
in.
here for
Or
3 meetings.
3 meetings and then not be voted in, so, so
So
there's
they
the
wouldn't
flip
even
side
be up to
of
speed.
Well, and how many of us at our first meeting were?
ready to.
Right.
adverse?
Or even the second or third meeting by the time you get caught
I don't
up.
think it's a fair position.
It takes a whole month just to go through town, sorry, oh, he's not here.
Yeah.
Yeah, to put somebody through that orientation.
But, I mean, they're ready maybe by November versus they're ready by January.
Well, they're
So-
gonna take office in November no matter what.
Understood, but there's still, the argument you're making is the same argument I'm gonna make, is that they could be ready by November because they'll have September and October to get caught up versus.
Doesn't mean an individual can't sit in the audience and
Oh, no, sure.
participate and learn
Right.
as they're doing right now
Right.
through the process. You don't have to be sitting here and making a decision to learn. And I don't know why I'm talking, I'm the one leaving. Sorry.
Classic.
That's because
It's
you've got an
classic me.
opinion and
I
it's
don't
your
know.
seat. It's
Well,
your
I
seat we're
just,
filling.
yeah, I just think it's a lot of turmoil to try and get somebody in. Because you do have to interview, you do have to go through an appointment.
No, we won't. No, we won't.
There we go.
You have,
Yep.
let's look to our legal counsel because
We don't have to.
We've
don't-
recruited people in the past and you could just put them right in.
you don't have to interview, you can just slot somebody in.
Yeah, we've done it in the past, but when we've done it, we've picked a former council person, a former mayor.
Okay.
So,
Wow.
but to take somebody brand new,
Completely up to you guys, I've
I
expressed my
I think
opinion.
we just wait. I don't think it's a fair position.
Well, you can still change your mind. I said you can still change your mind as we move along, see where it goes.
True.
I still got 2 meetings to convince them, so that's fine.
Good luck.
Good luck with that.
So the direction I heard was, for now, you're gonna put it on the upcoming ballot.
Right.
Leave the,
You're gonna
Leave it for,
leave the seat vacant and go through ballot.
Right.
Okay, just wanted to say that out loud. It's my reflective listening skills.
okay. Traffic change request policy.
Traffic control.
Traffic.
Operation.
traffic
Yeah,
operation.
yeah, okay.
Do you have a presentation for this one?
I'm just gonna kind of walk through and summarize, stand for questions. I can skip that too if you prefer. I'm open to however you want to proceed.
What is the, just one question. You know, we're gonna have a policy for if we're gonna have any changes on speed limits and such, or?
This has to deal with how we deal with requests that come in, to try and reduce engineering time, streamline it, and be consistent. No matter who's on the council or who's fielding the questions, that's the idea.
okay.
So the first paragraph is basically summarizes what you've heard me say many times. I think I've said it. When we get these requests for changes at a stop sign, people are, it's either a complaint or a request for some change. We want to take those seriously. And they're important. We want people to feel like they're being heard and that we're taking their concerns seriously. At the same time, when we respond to these, we want to do things that actually make things safer, not necessarily that make people feel good. Often, the answer, as you've seen, is no. But there's reasons for that. And so this is to try and kind of lay that out, why those things happen. Just in saying kind of the same thing in another way, not only do some practices not help, they can be harmful. If you do the inappropriate practice based on what people want, it may make common sense to them, but when you dig into the possible consequences, it can actually be harmful. This talks a little bit about definitions, at least for the purpose of this policy. An important concept here is practical responsibility. The safest condition, especially between a bike and a car or a pedestrian and a car, is when both operators, the pedestrian and the driver, take responsibility. If you try to make one party completely responsible, that actually cuts safety in half. We don't want this person not paying attention or this person not paying attention. They both have to be responsible. This paragraph talks about, we get a lot of requests for County Road 2 or 91. Those are not city streets, so we can't make changes. We can, from time to time, advocate for or against a request to change with the county, but our policy would be to send that person to those agencies instead. This table put together to try to differentiate between characteristics, practices that are actually safe, what kind of things are involved in those practices versus practices that are either not supportive or not proven to be supportive. And I'd like to go through this in a little, yeah.
If I may, so who is this, this is targeted for the general public?
This would be a policy adopted a lot for council members. I mean,
Okay.
this group.
So
but
we're
your
the target
successors,
audience of this, okay.
for staff, but also for any member of the public that cares to read it, it
Sure.
would be available to them as well.
Okay.
So, characteristics of practice of supportive safety address a safety issue that, in the opinion of the police chief, public works superintendent, or city engineer, meet warrants for specific practices based on measurable and observable data. So, contrast that with things that are requested for reasons other than safety. Sometimes they try to address issues that don't meet warrants or aren't based. So people are speeding. We get that complaint a lot. We go measure the speeds. They're not really speeding. So we wouldn't respond to that based on just a verbal request. We'd actually try and get the information. Another characteristics of things supportive of safety, we try to alter behavior related to safety through geometry or visual cues, things that actually cause a user of the right-of-way to behave differently without them even having to think about it or obey a rule. It's just kind of automatic. When the road gets narrower or curvy, you slow down. Contrasted with trying to change behavior through signs or stripes or things that they have to obey with, rather, or be cognitive of, rather than things that just kind of automatically make you behave differently. Practices that assume other users will comply with regulatory practices don't improve. If you assume every person's going to stop at the stop sign, you're in trouble. So that's what that's getting at. Other practices that actually reduce safety at an intersection, for example, or when you're laying out crosswalks. You try to reduce the number of conflict points. The fewer opportunities there are for a collision, the fewer collisions you're likely to have. We minimize exposure time, give you more sight distance, and provide places where you can take a break and be out of harm's way if that's deemed warranted, versus things that don't consider the potential conflicts and lead to requests. So if we can avoid mid-block crossings, on future development layouts, things like that. So that's what we're trying to get at. And then I've already talked about this practical responsibility bit. When both users take responsibility, you're going to be better off than if you try to put up a sign that makes the car driver responsible, or a little green guy in the intersection. Those things try to transfer responsibility, and that's not usually a good idea. We seek to promote more consistent compliance and instinctive recognition by conforming to standard practice. We use signs only that are in the Minnesota Manual Uniform Traffic Control Devices. We want motorists in Elko New Market to have seen these signs before, whether they've been in town or not. They're the same sign everybody else uses. If you use something weird, they don't know what to do with it, they tend to disregard it. Or if you use too many of something in the wrong application, they start to not do it. We already have stop sign compliance issues throughout this country because, partly at least, there's too many of them. People have to feel like there's a reason to stop at the stop sign or they won't stop. And so contrasting that with varying from standard practice, you're going to be hard-pressed to hear staff recommending not complying with that manual. And then finally, another thing we can do that's actually promote safety, educating users about safety practices. We are talking about that right now. Next year, we've got a lot of mill and overlay projects planned. We're looking at an open house this September. Part of that open house to educate about the overlay program is to put on some other information tables. One of them would be about using the right-of-way. Where should you walk when there's no sidewalk? Telling kids, wear your bike helmet, stuff like that. Just constantly educating people so that they're aware. How do you use a crosswalk safely? What is the law? We can put together some boards, have a policeman there that kind of explains if people have questions. Just another way to actually make the event more interesting by having more topics there. And so they also get more education about these upcoming projects. But it's also a community gathering that, is always fun. So that's one way we can do stuff like that.
Sorry, I'm chuckling at the word fun.
Fun. It is. Everybody likes to get together. We just had cake.
We did.
All right.
Wow.
Versus, so this is important. We're doing this at times and venue that's supportive of effective learning. Trying to teach someone what to do while they're on the road and have to make a decision is not the time, to have a lengthy sign explaining why they need to slow down. All right. Now, we'll move on a little quicker. I think these are fairly self-explanatory. This is, we're saying that anything in the street would be put in by the city. We're not going to allow people to go put out their own signs. We're not going to install signs that don't conform to Minnesota Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices. And we'll only use warning signs provided for in the manual. And we can circle back if there's any questions. This is a good one here, I think. Setting no speed limit that does not conform to the statute or limit set by the. So we're not going to just set arbitrary speed limits because we can't by law. There is a provision that allows you to set lower limits on some streets if you designate that and post the signage. We do not recommend that. At this point, this policy says you won't do that. I know there may be some discussion on that. This was put in quite a long time ago. I drafted this back in March. And one of the reasons is basically a survey that we saw another firm doing, looking at where there are 25-mile-an-hour limits. And they're not finding any changes in speed limits. They're still driving the same speeds. And so that's part of it. I don't see any evidence that changing the speed limit changes the speeds. So why go through that? And the other thing is, I'm not convinced at this point, based on everything I've seen so far, that we have a speed problem. We have concerns about speeds, but that's not the same as actually showing, yes, on this street, people are driving 38 miles an hour on average. If we get that data and further study shows that changing speed limits actually does reduce limits, then I would be fine with changing this based on the data I've seen. I don't think it's worth the time and effort and the potential unintended consequences to try and reduce speed limits. So that's in the policy. I want to make sure that's clear.
One question on that, Rich.
Yeah.
I saw data at the speed committee for metro cities, and they were showing that lowering speed limits on roads where average speed is 31 or 32 does drop the speed down to 30 or below. Basically because when the police give a ticket at 30, they won't give a ticket at 34 when the speed limit is 30. But if the speed limit is 25 and you get stopped, you find out that.
I'd be happy to look at any data and share that with Steve, and we'll certainly look at that if that changes our opinion. I'm just looking at where speeds are posted lower and what they've found so far.
The biggest, the city of Minneapolis is actually seeking to lower speed limits without posting all the signs.
That seems like folly to me. I can't think of a street where I can go over 30 miles an hour. It's too narrow. But,
Or congested.
yeah.
Right.
But I know it is something that cities are given the right to do
That's true.
without any
Yeah.
approval from any other place.
Yep. No, there's
And
no argument
The other
there.
thing they're recommending is, they actually recommend that if you can narrow the street, it works better.
I would be more supportive of looking at those types of
But the cost
things.
of narrowing certain streets, especially in our city, would be prohibitive. So in the meantime, lowering the speed limit to 25 to keep the speeds closer to 30
Yeah,
is not a, because we have some streets that are long and wide.
yeah.
And
But I think that the question that comes in, by lowering the speed, is it actually gonna do anything besides give me a false sense of more safety walking down Aaron Drive, thinking, well, the speed limit's 25, so I can feel better about it, when none of the drivers
No.
really give a damn about it. I mean, and
the idea is that way, it makes enforcement, where they're finding is it makes enforcement much more effective in those situations.
So I would go back to this attempt to transfer responsibility. You can't rely on people obeying the speed limit. That's.
No, but the difference is, at 39 from 25, they're getting a ticket for 14 miles an hour over.
Right.
And the judge isn't gonna let them off on a half fine. 14 miles and over is going to affect their driving record much, much more.
That could all
And-
be true if the police are there enough to make a difference, which may not be practical. That's-
Rich, this is to serve as a guideline for council.
Yep.
correct? This
Yep.
isn't a law, this isn't, so we
This is a
don't,
policy that staff would generally follow in responding to these.
but if we
So-
as
It
a
can be
council feel
overridden,
we.
it can be
yeah.
changed at any time. Yep.
Bless you.
Bless you.
We have tissues if you need it.
So the way this would work in
There's
practice
napkins on the
is,
table.
if this is adopted and someone comes in and says, we should put up a stop sign because people are speeding. We would probably show them, the flyer about stop sign information, why we wouldn't do that. But at the same time, we would go and try and get actual speeds and see if there's a problem and what might be contributing to it, and is there something practical we can do to provide relief. We wouldn't just drop it, but I probably wouldn't need to be involved in that, or very little, unless it was something complicated, and that's where we're trying
The
to
only
get.
reason I looked at it, and I brought it up, is because the death rate for every mile an hour over 30 miles an hour increases dramatically hitting a pedestrian. So the closer, anything you can do to keep the speed closer to 30 really pays
I
off in the
agree
long
with
run.
that statement, I haven't seen the data to show me that signs will do that, that's where.
It's not, it's a combination of signs and enforcement, and the enforcement is a lot more effective when the speed limit is lower because the ticket is bigger.
I would argue that we're probably going further in the weeds.
I
Yep.
think we are definitely going
This is
try
a
it.
policy, this is probably
Yep.
used for us to advise people to spend less money on engineering time.
And I think it's a
And be
good way to collect
consistent.
data, and you got the nice form and stuff, so now we can say we've gotten 15 of these requests over a certain
Right.
period of time, now we can bring in Rich or some, and get feedback.
Well, and the other thing, I end up spending a lot of time educating people with lengthy emails about why we can't do this and all. And so if you hand them this, hopefully it's at least a potential way to head something.
When it's a
Right.
consistent
The other,
message.
Yeah.
the other benefit with this, and I might be jumping ahead on your
Nope, go ahead.
show here, is we receive calls, complaints about speeding in areas. It might be in person, which then we generate what we call an ICR, or we might get a police call, a radio call over it. We deal with it, but then the next person is up here at City Hall, and then it goes through somebody else. This policy is gonna help design, funnel it, so it stays, like you said, there's a lot of it that Rich, no offense, probably wouldn't have to be involved in. But everybody is going to be getting the same information, it's gonna be kind of funneled in one general direction. And then we can go and collect the data that we need, and then it gets dispersed, again, to where it's supposed to go and who should have the information instead of some over here, some over there, some over there. Some more consistency.
We have a
We-
workflow.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I did jump ahead on
No,
your.
that's okay, yeah, it all goes to Chief Mortensen, so, and then he decides, but no, this is just kind of help sort out where things are routed. Typically, these come in the form of a call, or an email, or a question on the street, and so the idea would be get someone on city staff to get back to this person, and hopefully use this form, or at least the contents, to try and get as much information that's useful about the problem. Most of the time, it doesn't come in the form of, I've got this problem. It comes in the form of, I want this solution. So we're trying to turn it and try and get more information about the underlying problem. And so we've got, some check boxes here, and this can evolve over time. It's just something to get started. And then we've got a series of sort of information pieces. So there's one on crosswalks with just some facts about crosswalks and how you evaluate them, things to be aware of. And the same format applies, and we've got one on speed limits, and we've got one on stop signs, and we have one on warning signs. I'm going to miss, although I've never done it, I've been tempted, the slow children sign. I'm just so tempted to say, I drove through your neighborhood, they all look normal to me. But I've never done that, it's just,
Rich.
it's just a traffic engineer joke there.
Yeah.
But no, sometimes we get requests for these kinds of signs, and, they're not in the manual, and there's reasons. They're just not effective in changing behavior and other, less important problems. But the bottom line is they just don't really work. And so we wouldn't do that. But these flyers would be part of the policy and could be handed out, or maybe even available on the city's website if people wanted to look at this stuff. So That's it, and a little more lengthy discussion than I intended, but stand for any questions or comments or omissions if you see something not there.
Just said you were standing for questions.
I am.
You're sitting.
To see a
Remember
difference.
Is that like the slow engineer at
It's a
work?
slow engineer at work, yeah.
So, Rich, did you need is there something that we need to?
Well, the memo is asking for adoption, but that's entirely up to you. If you feel ready to adopt this policy, that's fine. If you feel like you'd like to ponder it more, that's up to you.
Motion to adopt the policy.
Second. Oh, we're tied. Go ahead. Give it to Kate.
No, give it to Trish. It's her last.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Yeah, let me have it, thanks.
All in favor?
Aye.
There's enough to draw on the-
Oh, good job.
Okay, item C, which was E on our consent agenda. No, item, yeah, E,
Yes.
the preserve it.
Thank you, Steve. Hi, Steve.
You'll see me. I'll be round.
I would like to introduce the council to builder and developer Kevin Komorowski. He's present in the audience tonight. We've been working with Mr. Komorowski for about 3 months regarding the possible annexation and development of 10 acres on the west side of the city limits. He did attend a city's development review team meeting where he received engineering and legal feedback. Township was present at that meeting as well. Township had one representative at that meeting. They did indicate that they didn't see a problem with the annexation at that meeting. They thought it sounded like it makes sense and that it was orderly growth of the city. Following the comments by the development review team, Mr. Komorowski submitted a concept plan to the Planning Commission to gain input as to their support for the development and annexation of the property for the proposed development. He did receive feedback at the June 28th or 26th Planning Commission meeting. The comments from the Planning Commission are summarized in the memo that was presented. In a nutshell, this would be a single-family residential development. It would include an extension of Park Street towards the west, and would include a development of somewhere between 30 and 35 lots. We believe 32 lots at the present time. It would require PUD zoning because of the lot sizes being requested are smaller than currently allowed by our city ordinance. He's requested a reduction in setbacks from the current standard of the ordinance. There was an evaluation of a trail that is included in the city's park and trail plan that is shown on this property. We did work with his engineer and the city engineer to evaluate some steep slopes near where this trail is currently shown on our plan. The Parks Commission made a recommendation to and agreed that it does not make sense to place the trail along the wetland on this particular property, but we did look for opportunities that the trail could be constructed in the next property to the east or to the west. So the Planning Commission and Parks Commission are supporting this at this time, and we are here before you tonight to ask for a motion to authorize staff to, upon receipt of an annexation petition, which we actually received this afternoon, to negotiate or prepare an annexation agreement and negotiate the terms of such with the Township Board, and also prepare a pre-development agreement with Mr. Komorowski. The recommendations, as noted by the Parks and Planning Commission, are included in the motion, so that there is no question as to what the city is supporting in terms of lot sizes and setbacks.
Discussion?
Well, I hate to say it, but the one who pulled it stepped out.
I say we make a motion to approve it. No, it would be kind
That would be
No.
kind of,
It would be. Well,
kind of cruddy.
Hey.
I know that one of the questions we had was the 70 feet And we had just asked before the meeting even started about other cities. And you said that a lot of other cities are going down to the 70 feet instead of the 85, so that's becoming common. So maybe that's something in the future we're gonna wanna look at in our ordinances to see if we need to reduce
That's correct.
our sizes of our city lots. But
We had talked about that before.
Yes, the planning commission has talked about it once, and next they wanted to do some field trips about some other communities, but there does seem to be, there was 4-to-1 support on the commission to reduce the lot sizes, to create more feasible, economical, affordable housing, and that just seems to be the trend. So we do believe that will be
The
the,
item you pulled.
You almost had a motion and just approved it.
That's fine.
But we honored the fact that you pulled it and had questions.
right.
Kevin wanted to address the council. Kevin, not you, Kevin, but Kevin Merrick, who just left, so. I wanted to catch him real quick. I apologize for interrupting the meeting.
Okay.
I didn't have questions. I don't know why everyone's looking at me.
Well, you asked for it to be pulled from consent agenda.
Yeah, to be reviewed, so the rest of the council
Right.
who wasn't at the
Planning
planning commission meeting could.
Well, then I motion
Give
to
a feel.
approve.
Darn.
I would just like to make one more note. So, along the lines of, this may be the norm in the future as the planning commission continues to evaluate this lot width requirement. If they decide to go to 75 or 70 in the future, they did note that, typically in a PUD zoning, we're looking for, here's what we're gonna do for you, what are you gonna do in exchange, the give and take concept, looking for a more high-quality development. Now, we have identified a trail connection to County Road 2 in the future. We've identified some minor things, but the planning commission did pretty specifically state that architectural requirements, if they are to be imposed, should not be to an extreme degree. That they may ask for some brick or a stone on the front of the house. They talked high level. They just didn't think it needed to be to an extreme degree.
So basically like the photos that are in our packet of the houses that they,
Those
Well,
kind of what the houses will look
Those were
like.
photos that were submitted by Mr. Komorowski that were submitted to them. They were acceptable to them.
Yeah, they're nice.
I think the idea is not to have our increased architectural standards for a PUD or any other things we ask for.
Just because they're narrowed.
Just because they're getting smaller lots, not have those add so much costs that it
Right.
makes the homes not affordable
Well, you
anymore.
defeat the purpose of
Right.
getting more densely populated and cost effective if
Right.
you offset it with.
Right, well, why increase the cost on the build? I mean, if you're gonna build a house on a 50-foot lot, just like they were, why would you wanna put that much into it? Keep it affordable, and then maybe some of our businesses could have somebody living in town that one of the two that were living there could work at one of our businesses.
Right.
Okay, so there was a motion and a second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Look forward to getting started.
That's it. Any
Thank you.
discussion by
Thank you.
council?
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to, like I said, the Merricks were here, they wanted to just share their thanks to the rest of the council and city staff and planning commission, of course, who are not here, but for all the hard work and time that was put into the
ordinance.
the ordinance regarding commercial vehicles, so they just wanted to share that, so I'm sharing on behalf of that.
That was
I
very
feel
nice.
bad that they didn't get a chance to
Okay.
stand up and speak. I feel bad.
Oh, well.
That's all I had, Mayor.
Okay. That's- Any other discussion by council except for goodbyes to Trish?
Whatever.
Whatever.
Don't let the door.
Twitter.
Motion to adjourn?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.